You know, Isabella's great and everything, but I think this episode would have been much better if there was a different imaginary friend involved, like Coco. Could have been like Clara, could have been like, "Oh, Coco, you're my best friend. Coco. Oh, Coco, we're not allowed in engineering. Let's not go to engineering. Coco. Coco, what do you mean you're gonna kill everyone on board? Don't kill us. Coco. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Imaginary Friend, which is episode 22 of season 5 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 5th season episode, Imaginary Friend. So Imaginary Friend is the episode where the Enterprise goes into a nebula and a alien life form that lives in that nebula manifests itself as an imaginary friend of a young girl that lives on the Enterprise. She tries to get the young girl to go into all these restricted areas like engineering, and when the adults kick her out and exclude her from going there, she gets very upset and realizes that humanity sucks, and so the aliens that live in the nebula try to destroy the ship, and Picard has to talk to the imaginary friend and convince her that the humans are actually very good because they care about their children. And so the aliens realize that humans are okay, so they let the Enterprise live. So this episode is not very well liked, if I'm reading it correctly. I don't think I'd call it like one of the most hated episodes ever, but all the reviews and different opinions on this episode seem to not be all that positive on it. And I do recall when I was younger, when this episode first came out, that me and my sister really hated this episode. I do remember her particularly being very hard on this episode and talking about how much it sucks. But I gotta be honest, like, my opinion of this episode probably has gone up a little bit. I still don't think it's a good episode, but I'm not as bad negative on it. Like, I think comparatively speaking, when you look at some of the other episodes that are terrible, this one's not so bad. And I think the main thing of what makes this episode not so bad is I thought it was very interesting seeing it from a child's perspective, and I know that some people hated this episode because its main characters were not the main characters in the show. They were guest stars, but I actually thought that was interesting. I liked that aspect of it. I liked the day in the life of a young girl in the Enterprise, and it was a pretty I thought it was an interesting concept that an alien would pretend to be that she would have an imaginary friend, and an alien show up and would be the imaginary friend. And I gotta be honest, like, some of the scenes between the two young girls, when she first meets her, is like, Isabella, when did you become real? Like, that was interesting, and seeing how she interacted with the different adults. I think the Guinan stuff was very good. But where the episode runs into an issue with me is when it tries to do the threat. And this is, I always talk about this, that a lot of Star Trek episodes sort of hit a snag because they want to have a threat of the week. And so the main issue I have of it is that Isabella, this alien, decides to manifest as an imaginary friend instead of, just talking to one of the crew members, or maybe like someone else, a review I was watching, saying that because it wanted like the Enterprise's energy, so it could have just like put itself into Geordi's mind, or like pretended to be Geordi when he wasn't there, and be like, oh, let's shoot this energy beam out into the nebula. Like, that would have made a lot more sense. But I guess they're saying they're like judging the people. But the bigger issue I have is that they think that adults are big meanies because they won't let children into sensitive areas of the ship, so she wants to destroy the entire ship, including the young girl that she befriended, and Picard has to kind of talk her down and be like, we care about our children, we'll look after them, and that was cheesy. I'm sorry, that was really dumb. And it has like a sort of, I don't know, like horror movie schlock kind of feel to it in that regard. Because it's funny, because Brennan Braga, who wrote this episode, and this episode apparently went through a lot of drafts and a lot of different hands, but he sort of, and I believe not just him, but several others, came to the conclusion that they needed to make it more horror-esque. Because the original draft apparently just had a friendly imaginary friend pop up and be like, oh, I'm your friend. And it was supposed to be more like something along the lines of E.T. But Brennan Braga's like, no, this is not working. It's just not going anywhere. There's not enough meat on the bones. So let's make her scary. Let's make her eyes grow red and go, I'm going to kill you all. Da, da, da. I have mixed feelings about that decision, because part of me can see how having a friendly alien would be a docile script that didn't really go anywhere. It was kind of just meandering, which I believe is what the writers described the problem was. So I get that, but I think making it evil is kind of like a too easy of a quick fix. Is like, oh, let's just make the imaginary friend scary. Well, not evil exactly, but scary, and murderous, and like, I'm gonna kill you all, and then at the end come back and like, no, I actually love you guys, you're okay. Just because Picard, I know Picard's speeches are awesome, but just because Picard gave a speech, he's like, no, I'm actually not gonna kill you, I actually love you. Yeah, so it seemed like the character was all over the place because of that, and also like, yeah, some of it came off as a little cheesy, like with her eyes growing red, and it just seemed like a sudden turn to like, oh, I'm your best friend, I want to be friends, to all of a sudden like, well, you're not gonna go in restricted areas, so I'm gonna kill you and everyone on board. It's like that escalated quickly. What? But one of the things I did like, a scary moment that I thought was so satisfying, was when Counselor Troy was looking in Claire's quarters, because Claire was freaked out because Isabella, said, I'm going to kill everyone on board, and her eyes started glowing red. So she was scared, she was freaked out, so Troy went to the quarters, let's check in here. Is this any scary imaginary friends in here? No, not in here. What about the closet? I'll check the closet. And when she turns around, Isabella appears out of nowhere and shoots Troy. I don't know. Am I sadistic or something for loving that? Because it's the fact that, I can understand Troy's perspective as a child psychologist, although that's not her specialty, but I guess it's part of what she does, is that when a child tells you they have an imaginary friend, you don't actually believe them. You try to humor them and placate them and don't destroy their fantasy, but obviously you're not going to think that this imaginary friend is real. But then again, Troy's out in a spaceship that travels that far and it reaches the space, and in Star Trek all these weird weird phenomenon, weird aliens constantly visit the ship. So maybe she shouldn't have ruled it out as much as she did. Just saying, it's different than if the psychologist was in Chicago, modern day Chicago, being out in the 24th century in the Star Trek world, where you have Abraham Lincoln floating in space and time loops and all this aliens that come and get you pregnant. It seems like, yeah, maybe she should have considered that possibility. But I just loved it because Troy was kind of humoring her and being like, oh, there's no aliens here, and then turns around and what the fuck is that? I don't know why I get pleasure out of that, but I do. But anyway, but for the most part, like this, yeah, the scariness aspect of it was, yeah, it just didn't work, and it came off as cheesy. Now, this is the 7th and final episode of season 5 that has a B-plot bullshit anomaly. Now, one of the reviews I watched said they didn't think it was a B-plot because it was so connected to the A-plot, but I am going to have to disagree on that. Yes, the two of them are very connected, so it is one of the more flimsy examples of a, side B-plot, because the B-plot is this weird nebula that is, fucking up the Enterprise, and you find out that the imaginary friend, that's the A-plot, is actually in the life form in that nebula, and her actions or experiences on the Enterprise directly inform why the nebula is being so dangerous and attacking them. So I can see the argument that is not like too, because when I say the A-plot B-plot thing, as I said, my definition is a rigid like character story, and then B-plot is some thread of the week anomaly bullshit that has nothing to do with the character story. I think the biggest separation of that was the episode that I just covered that had this phenomenon, which is cost of living, where the B plot was not even acknowledged by the characters in the A plot. But here they are. This is probably the example that they are the most connected, because there is a direct correlation between the two. But I still classify it because it's a stupid nebula anomaly BS that's hurting the Enterprise, and the Enterprise has to, we're hurt by this thing, and it's not the main point of the episode. The main point of the episode is the imaginary friend. That's just in the end, it does come into the imaginary friend storyline because they have been related the whole time, but still, I don't know. I don't care what anyone says. I still think it's a nonsense B-plot anomaly bullshit. And so, so this is the 7th episode of Season 5, and none of the other episodes of Season 5 will have this, because I think what we have after this, Borg, next phase, Inner Light, Times Arrow, none of those count for that. So, 7 is the final total for Season 5. I said I'd be counting this. I will count for season 6 and 7, but I can almost guarantee it won't be as much. I believe season 4 was 4 episodes. It was either 3 or 4. I can't remember exactly. The biggest contender for this will be season 3 of Voyager. When I get up to that, we'll see. And maybe some other seasons of Voyager might give this season a run for its money. But 7 is the final count for season 5. Anyway, so speaking of Guinan, I didn't really speak of Guinan until earlier, but anyway, as I said, I like the Guinan stuff in here, and I learned that she wasn't in the script originally. It's just Whoopi Goldberg called them up and was like, hey, I've got nothing going on, because she's always doing movies and other stuff at the time, so they can only use her certain times. Like, she barely appears in season 6. I think only like 1 or 2 episodes in season 7. I don't think she appears at all, so I guess she would have a lot of other stuff. But even in earlier seasons, her availability was very sporadic. So she called them up and was like, hey, I'm available to do, I can do stuff, so why don't you have me do stuff? So they're like, alright, well then, so they just wrote these extra scenes with Guinan in this episode. And I've heard some people say that if you can tell that it feels added and unrelated to everything, but I very much disagree. I think the Guinan scenes are probably my favorite scenes in the whole episode. I think they add to the characteristics, and this gets back to my main point of how I actually think they should have done the ET storyline. But I'll get back to that. Let me stay on Guinan, though. Because we had that great scene. I think it's probably one of the more humorous scenes with Guinan talking to a character in 10 Forward, where she's talking to Data about the nebula and about how you can see oh, this is a Turkalian razorback beast, and as you can see its fangs. And Data's like, all I see is a nebula with swirls. I don't understand, humanity's or humanoid tendency to look and find patterns and stuff that's completely random. But after all, that's clearly a bunny rabbit. I fucking love that. Well, it's clearly a bunny rabbit. I don't know. It doesn't seem like anyone else really liked that line, but I really like that line. But also when she was talking to Clara about her imaginary friend, and which was the Razor Beast, like that was a cool story. Like that, to me, that added to the characterization that all the adults, like Troy was obviously just humoring her, like, hi Isabella, but Guinan, Guinan's a much better counselor than Troy, because Guinan was sincere. She didn't come off as humoring, and I think like kids can tell that, like Claire could tell that. And so so I think that did add a lot to the episode. So it's Whoopi Goldberg being available increased the value of this episode. So getting back to the ET stuff, as I mentioned, sometimes periodically you don't always need a threat of the week in order to have a good episode. Sometimes it's better to not have a threat, and sometimes I wish they would do that more. And they is a Rick Berman thing, but to be fair, he's not the only one, but he's definitely very strict about this, that there has to be tension, there has to be a threat of some kind, and that often leads to bad storytelling. Not always, but yeah, when they try to shove a threat, like if the threat's natural to the story, like, Best of Both Worlds or something like that, then sure, it works. Or yesterday's Enterprise or something like that. But when they have a character-based story that's not really threat-based, and they're like, oh, there's no threat here, we gotta shove one in here, that's when you get problems. And as I mentioned, it got cheesy towards the end. That's the main issue I have with the episode, is the threat and how cheesy it got, and how Picard had to give a speech about how we care for children. It was so dumb. I'm sorry, but it was. But if they had just had a friendly alien, and it was making friends with Claire, and it was actually a strict character, because the character stuff in this episode is what I like the most. I like the most about Claire and her relationship with her father, and how it related to seeing the different adults that she had to interact with. And maybe you could have the imaginary friend be like, oh, let's go to engineering, but not for any nefarious purpose, but just because it doesn't understand. And then her getting kicked out and just having problems with the adults, and then the imaginary friend maybe inadvertently alienating her, and then the two have a falling out, and then they sort of have to, the imaginary friend has to learn more about humanity, and then maybe not because it shot Troy or it appeared out of nowhere and eyes turned red and threatened to destroy the ship. Maybe it just, one of the adult characters found out. Maybe Troy actually accidentally ran into, like, oh my god, you're real, and they had this conversation with the alien, and the aliens, you don't have to have a threat. In fact, I think this would have been way more interesting without the threat, because the threat's cheesy. And it just doesn't jive towards the end, where they're like, oh, these aliens just tried to destroy us. But Picard gave a speech to them, so now they're all good. So let's shoot this energy out into and feed them and make them even more powerful, so they can destroy the next ships that come. I mean, because they think we're cool, but who knows what they'll think of the other ships. Maybe a Klingon ship, they'll be, oh no, fuck these guys, and they'll kill them. All thanks for the Enterprise for giving them all that energy. It just doesn't work. The script is, so I disagree with Brennan Braga. I think that the making it scary, even though there's some parts I do think are scary, like the whole Troy thing, I love that, just shooting her, but I still think it was the wrong decision. Now, season 5 is, I believe, has my sister pointed out in one of the comments she made in one of my previous videos, is that she referred to it once before as the season of children. And I believe, well, no, this isn't quite the last episode, because there are some kids in the Inner Light, although I wouldn't say the Inner Light is about children. But, you know, Picard in this alternate life has some children, so I think it counts. But there was a lot of episodes this season that focused on children. I think this is the last one that actually focused on children. Where you had a main plot line with kids and disaster. You had New Ground, hero worship, cost of living. Yeah, there must be a few others I'm forgetting about, but yeah, there was a bunch. And I talked about this earlier in season 5, that this was just their attempt to be more art house, because it's an art house trope, I think, too, or to be more dramatic, because it's just a dramatic art house trope to be like, let's have children be friends with adults and show the wonders of being a child. Yeah, but anyway, and I think this is probably one of the lesser examples of season 5 that did that. But speaking of kids, I also talked in previous videos about child actors on Star Trek, and I'm not going to go through other episodes because I already did that. I think it was Hero Worship I talked about that. But, or maybe it was New Ground, one of those two. But I do want to talk about Claire and Isabella, because I did mention this before, that I think Claire is an amazing actress. She does a really good job, which is why I think they bring her back in Shadow Play in Deep Space Nine, because she's a really good child actor, and I'm sure that they're hard to find, especially judging off of the other child actors they hire in some of these other episodes, like Disaster. It's hard to find good child actors. And she's and Rascals, but yeah, she's very good. I think she carries the episode. I've heard some people complain about the episodes, like, oh, it's problematic to have your focus be children, and then because their acting's not that good, and it's a bit problematic. And some people specifically said they didn't like her acting in this episode, and I don't get that. I think her acting was great. I think she carried the episode. It was just super impressive. Like, I really bought her. And unlike, speaking of Hero Worship, unlike that episode where they had a 13-year-old boy play a character who was behaving like a 5 or 6-year-old, Claire was actually young enough to be believed as being like this. Like, I don't know how old the actress was. I'm not going to look it up because I'm too lazy, but she appears to be around 8 years old, and I totally buy, like, she behaves like an 8-year-old, and maybe a little bit younger, maybe 6 or 7, but maybe I could buy her as that. It's not like a 13-year-old like it was with fucking Hero Worship. So it is something that I can buy. And that makes it better. And and she did a really good job. On the other hand, though, Isabella, the actress who played her, not so good. Now, I've heard different opinions on this. Like, I heard some people pointing out that Isabella had the harder job because she had to come off as kind of creepy and scary, and also she has some technobabble lines. And once she talks to Picard at the end of the episode, and she actually does well. She does okay with the technobabble, which I'm sure would be harder for a child actor to do. But I think there's a line between trying to be like alien or scary to just being bland and ordinary and unconvincing, and I think she crosses that line. I think her acting's terrible, I'm sorry to say, but she did have a harder job. And apparently, I can't remember what else she appeared in, but apparently she appeared in something else, and she was known for having, like, she just showed up to have a very creepy, spooky, creepy eyes or whatever, and so they apparently hired her just because of that, because she already had done work were coming off as creepy. But I think they should have done a little bit more scouting for an actor who's a little bit better. I'm sorry, but especially when she's paired up with Claire, because that actress, as I said, so much better. The two, yeah. But anyway, that is just my humble opinion. So now I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. And I'm indebted to you all. So I would like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse. Thank you so much for all your support throughout the years. I also like to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joe Lavals, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we have some Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Ricky that says, we have another episode in Season 5 that is focused on children. And to be honest, this episode is dumb and stupid. And again, A-plot/B plot with character story and a dumb bullshit anomaly subplot. Also, to be honest, this is one of the worst episodes in this season, and I wouldn't put this in the top 10 worst, but definitely in my top 20. For one, this episode is extremely unoriginal. This type of premise was used so many times in other episodes of Trek and in other films and other TV shows, and to be honest, I didn't care, and the Isabella character wasn't developed correctly, and she acted very bland, and I couldn't tell if it was how the species behave or is it was the actress portraying the character. The actress. And I didn't buy the friendship between the little girl and the imaginary friend. However, I must admit that the little girl is probably the best child actress in the show, as she gave a really good performance, and that's what saves this episode from being complete crap. Speaking of children episodes, I think the worst child episode of all time is in Stargate Atlantis Season 4 Harmony, where Shepard and McKay had to babysit a spoiled brat young queen, and that episode is one of the most annoying episodes you can watch, and that actress was awful. I believe Atlantis went to shit after Weir and Carson were written off the show, but I just wanted to mention that, so my rating is a 2 out of 10. Yeah, oh God, could not agree with you more about Harmony. What a terrible episode. What an annoying, I can't watch that episode. It's just it's stereotyping young bratty kids, and it's so bad. An episode that's not quite as bad, but in the Star Trek universe, is Innocence over on Voyager, where you had 3 annoying kids going meh, 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 to Tuvok, which would turn out to be Benjamin Buttons, but still, it doesn't matter. It was 3 annoying kids going meh, meh, meh. I hated that episode. But anyway, I'll get to it eventually. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, what a boring episode. Mark is absolutely right about so many boring to average episodes in Season 5. Did Michael Piller take a year off and leave TNG in the hands of Rick Berman? As Mark is reading this, he is nodding his head in agreement. If it wasn't for Deanna Troi and Guinan, this episode would get a 1. Troi was great in this season, as she did more as a counselor than using her superpowers. Number 8 for Mark, saying it wasn't earned, but I think that should be number 4 on the list. So my rating is 3. At least it's not the worst episode of the season. That goes to the lower, the awful. I guess you reviewed iBorg before, so my comment will be brief. What a great episode, but however, was this the episode that destroyed the Borg? So Picard did plant a virus in the Borg, and that was called an individual. So my rating is 9 times Hughes said why to Geordi out of 10. I don't know. iBorg is not the episode that ruined the Borg. That started in Descent, but the death knell of the Borg are shitty from now on, the jumping the shark moment, if you will, for the Borg was definitely Dark Frontier and Voyager. So it started to go downhill in Descent. I think Iborg was still, as you say, amazing, so it definitely didn't ruin the Borg. But yeah, Descent started going downhill. We got a few good Voyager ones in season 4, and then Drone in season 5 was awesome. But Dark Frontier was the death now. I mean, there was that one in season 6. God, what was the one that Ronald D. Moore wrote that had those 3 Borg who were in a triad? What's it called? Oh, God, Survival Instinct. That's it. That was a really good one. So that came after Dark Frontier. And the collective one with the Echab, those were okay as well. But it's mainly like the Borg Queen that fucking ruined it. And Picard, yeah, the Borg sucked in Picard. Even in season 1 and especially in season 3. But, most of all season 2, obviously. But anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Imaginary friend, more like I wish this episode would end." Nice. That's a good one. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who said, "All the ingredients for a typical boring episode are present. Space anomaly, an incorporeal alien, and a child as the main guest character. Because we know the alien presence from the start, there is no engaging mystery. But I liked how the character and emotions of Clara were brought out in the script, and the actress did a decent job. There were some good scenes with Troy and Guinan, and the situation was solved by a Picard speech instead of using technobabble. My rating is a 5 out of 10. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying about Picard's speech is a better way to resolve a situation in technobabble. I would normally totally agree, except for in this case, it was silly. It was just silly. Like, we care for our children. Like, that's dumb. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "Isabella. Actually, I think the writers intended Isabella to act like Rhoda, the evil girl in The Bad Seed. The problem, the actress who played her was terrible, which is too bad as the actress who played Claire was actually quite good. Maybe her father should give some parenting tips to Worf as to how to be a good single parent." Norman, you just love giving Worf shit about being a bad father, but fair enough. Not saying he isn't a bad father, he totally is. But anyway, as always, Troy was good in her role as counselor, although I guess Isabella somehow eluded her. Well, she had to, otherwise there'd be no story and no reason for Troy to be humoring Clara. This alien chain, of course, provides yet another anomaly. Mark, you said earlier on you were going to count these for the 5th season. How many so far, out of curiosity? Well, I answered that. 7. 7 is the total for season 5. Anyway, yes, this one is probably more similar to our Extraordinary Aliens and Galaxy's Child, and boy, will we run into more aliens like these in Voyager. Isn't Worf supposed to be more able to recognize if someone is or is on the ship not accounted for, or was that the only in the warp bubble Beverly was trapped and that Worf was like that? Anyway, this episode is bland, a basic Trek script, and the best I can give it is 5 beams of warp energy into space out of 10. To be fair, be fair to Worf, because there's 1,000 people on the Enterprise, and I'm sure Worf he might be more familiar with like the security officers or even the Starfleet personnel, but civilians, especially kids. And plus, like, the Enterprise isn't Voyager. If Voyager's more of a case because that's an enclosed situation, but the Enterprise constantly gets restaffed and people going on and off. And also, they mentioned that specifically that Clara was new on the ship because her father just transferred there. So I get him not making a big deal of the fact he didn't recognize Isabella, but that's just me. I never heard of the bad seed, so I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to there, but that's just me. But otherwise, yeah, I agree. Troy should have sensed it, but they could always throw in a bullshit line about, I can't sense these aliens. They always do that as an excuse. Anyway, thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Imaginary Friend out of 10 is going to be a 4. Poor. And I think I'm being very generous by giving it a 4 instead of a 3. But, I really liked the character story with Claire, and I really liked her actress, and I liked the scenes with Guinan, especially that bunny rabbit thing. That was hilarious. And yeah, some of the character stories of a day in the life of what it's like for a kid to be in Enterprise, and this is the Imaginary Friend. The problem is when the plot kicks in and they do the stupid horror thing and they attack the ship, and Picard has to be like, we care about our children. That's when the episode totally lost me, and it just came off as way too goofy and dumb towards the end of it. So can't give it a positive rating, but I'll go as high as a 4. Anyway, that is it for my review of Imaginary Friends. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Where's we at? So Saturday I'll be over on Patreon to review or to revisit my review for Borg for Patreon supporters. And Sunday night, Monday morning, I'll be covering episode 5 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. And then Tuesday, back to cover the second part of Star Trek Prodigy season 2, reviewing the back end, the last 10 episodes of the season. And on Wednesday, back to the TNG reviews on my channel public for the next phase review. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Next Generation, many other shows, many other Star Trek videos, and many other shows like House of the Dragon and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.